Why get all your holiday decorations delivered through Instacart? Because maybe you only bought 2 wreaths but have 12 windows. Or maybe your toddler got very eager with the advent calendar. Or maybe the inflatable snowman didn't make it through the snowstorm. Or maybe the twinkle lights aren't twinkling. Whatever the reason, this season, Instacart's here for hosts and their whole holiday haul. Get decorations from the Home Depot, CVS, and more through Instacart and enjoy free delivery on your first 3 orders. Service fees and terms apply.
Trying to track down Nicholas Alahverdian has proven to be no easy task. Before the fugitive was suspected of faking his own death, as authorities in other states were closing in, Rhode Island State Police were looking for him on previous charges. And Alahverdian was already showing he was skilled at disappearing.
From WJAR in Providence, Rhode Island, this is NBC 10 True Crime International Mystery.
Brian Crandall with you again. We're digging into the past of Nicholas Alahverdian, or Arthur Knight, who authorities say is Mr. Alahverdian, or Nicholas Rossi, a fugitive from the United States. Before he was a wanted fugitive that was caught in Scotland, Rhode Island State Police had some interactions with Nicholas Alahverdian for a few issues. I'm joined today by Major Robert Kramer, a detective commander of the Rhode Island State Police, and Detective Conor O'Donnell, who had direct interactions with Nicholas Alahverdian a few years ago. So we'll get into that, but first I wanted to ask you both, what do you make of what's happening right now in Scotland? I'll start with you, Major Kramer. What do you think of these developments and this person over there who claims he's not who everybody else says he is?
Oh, I mean, we've had no direct contact with any of the authorities over in Scotland, but what I see is what you see in the media, portrayed in the media, and it's vintage of what we believe Alahverdian is, an egotistic maniac who just doesn't, does anything to avoid responsibility. The fact that he wouldn't show his arms to you, again, to me, is indicative of him trying to be evasive. And without being personally involved with the people in Scotland, I have all the faith and confidence in the law enforcement over there. And I'm sure they did their due diligence in trying to identify this party. So I think at the end of the day, we're all talking to Nicholas Alahverdian.
And Detective O'Donnell, you spoke with Mr. Alahverdian a number of years ago. What's your take on this person over there and what he sounds like and what he looks like and kind of his actions and his responses? Does it look familiar to you?
It does. I hate to say it, but kind of comical. Just listening to the way he speaks, and it almost seems goes above and beyond to put on the act that he's somebody other than who he really is.
And just take me back a few years ago, and why were you all involved and looking for Nicholas Alahverdian in Rhode Island?
So initially, at the time that I began to look at Mr. Alahverdian, I was doing sex offender registry checks and compliance while assigned to the Detective Bureau, and Mr. Alahverdian's name came up as he had an active bench warrant for his arrest. So as we used that his arrest warrant as the opportunity to go conduct a compliance check at his house, which was in the city of Providence. Turns out he wasn't living there. We did some digging into where he could have been, couldn't find him, and got an arrest warrant for him for failure to notify change of address, as he was I think a level 2 sex offender at that time. And issued the arrest warrant. It was signed by a judge, issued the arrest warrant, and put it on Rhode Island's Most Wanted, trying to seek help from the public to locate him.
And was this 2018?
I don't remember the exact date, but it was around that time.
Yeah, March of 2018, Brian.
Yeah, and when you were looking for somebody, and I'm guessing this is, as investigators quite regularly, is to try to find people who may not want to be found. Was it surprising to you that you could not find him?
I mean, at the onset, no. At the onset of it, no. It's not uncommon. I mean, it requires a little bit more. Somebody doesn't want to be found. Sometimes it can be hard. But he just had very little to no ties in Rhode Island outside of who he had been, documented law enforcement contacts. So it was literally like he just, I guess, kind of just up and disappeared. And that's why we sought help through Rhode Island's Most Wanted to see if anybody could, give us information to his whereabouts.
And then at some point you did have contact with him?
I did. So the internet being the internet, somebody must have alerted Nick that his face was on the internet and on Rhode Island's Most Wanted, and he didn't take too kindly to that. And one way or another, he called head of state police headquarters and was able to put in contact with me, and that's where my experience with Mr. Alahverdian all began.
And what were those interactions like? I guess, where did he say he was, and what was his claim?
So he never would tell me where he was. He was very very wordy, and he would dance around a lot of things that you try and pick up in context or conversation as to where he would have been. He wouldn't tell me who he was with, where he was. Really wouldn't say much, other than the fact that it was, I am no longer a United States citizen. I have denounced my citizenship, and that he has no intention of ever returning to the United States. And then went on to try to lecture me about Rhode Island law.
And was he trying to, and I don't know if do you know what his sex offender status came from? Do you know what those allegations stemmed from?
So at the time, I didn't know what they stemmed from, meaning like what the investigation was or the context of it. I just knew that it was an out-of-state conviction from, I believe it was state of Ohio, and that the sex offender board or registration, they determine what out-of-state offenses are equivalent to. So if the charge, I think, was like sexual imposition out there, I believe. So they have their own way of determining what that is equivalent to in Rhode Island, and if it is applicable as a sex offense, and how much time it needs to be on the registry, or if he's a lifetime registrant. So I think they determined that charge and conviction was equivalent to a second-degree sexual assault conviction in Rhode Island, and they dictated however long it was. But as far as like who his victim was and what the allegations were, I did not know.
But you said he tried to debate you. So what was he trying to debate his status on the registry? Was he trying to talk his way out of that?
Yes, well, not so much really the registry. I guess that was parts of it, but more of it was that he just didn't think he should have a warrant because he was no longer a citizen. He was no longer obligated to obey our laws and so forth. And he, used legal jargon, and he would, try and throw it at me that he was a lot more educated than me, and whether it be or not, he just it was one of those conversations where no matter what you said to somebody, his opinion's what matters, and he's right, I'm wrong. So the conversation ultimately went nowhere.
And I'm guessing you used to questioning a lot of people. Did the interactions with him stick out with you at all, or is that kind of par for the course for what you do?
They stick out more or less because you try to, every police officer is a human, and they have, a set of, values, and we carry ourselves in our own independent way based on how we were raised or whatever it may be. And I like to treat people like people, and be, treat people how I would want to be treated. And I try to talk to people that way. And the way that he spoke to you was that charismatic, egotistical, like, listen, you really don't mean anything to me. Like, you're dumb. I'm more of a bother. And he just really tried to put you down using big words that you need a dictionary to define, and that you would never use in a normal everyday conversation.
And so my understanding is that case was ultimately resolved, but he never turned up in Rhode Island. Is that correct?
No. So through our investigation, after, he started making contact with us or with me, I sought help from our fugitive unit, who was ultimately able to track him as departing the United States out of, I believe it was New Jersey, Newark, possibly, on an outbound flight to Ireland.
And he hired a lawyer and basically that the
Yes. So
failing to
yes,
change his
subsequent to
address
that,
case was resolved, right?
it was.
Yeah.
I later learned that.
And then Major Kramer, then at that point when he had disappeared, was it anybody's understanding as to why he may have left the country? I think we now know that he was facing some fraud charges in Ohio and was potentially a suspect in a rape case in Utah. Was that known to you at the time, or did you just think he took off?
No, I don't think we knew that at the time. I think this all came to light afterwards. I can only speculate as to why he left. I guess, maybe the pressure that we were putting on him to, obviously register with our sex offender registry. But I think in that time frame after that, I think the FBI had put a warrant out for him in 10/2019 for wire fraud. And I'm pretty sure he knew that. So maybe he, I can again only speculate that he was trying to avoid that.
And then, so once your issue with him was resolved, and as you said, now there's these charges coming from Ohio in particular, what was your when did he next cross your radar? I think, we've done reporting that he started reaching out to media outlets saying he was dying at some point, either at the end of 2019, early 2020. When did you next hear about him, and did he surface in your view?
He never really stopped contacting us. He was contacting some of the detectives in major crimes units, specifically our sex offender registry. We later learned he was constantly contacting politicians in the state. I don't think he ever stopped contacting Detective O'Donnell. So that was just him until his reported death, which we believe he self-reported. I believe that was in February of 2020. Then after that, I think things just stopped directly from him, and all of a sudden it became, correspondence from his wife, or the family, the Alahverdian family.com website. So.
Detective O'Donnell, did he ever tell you he was dying, or had you stopped talking to him at that point?
No, so I'd say probably the contacts were frequent at first, and then they slowly slowed down and they ceased with me because I think he figured out he was getting nowhere with me, and he hired a lawyer. His case went through the process. I do believe that he did continue, like the major said, contacting the sex offender registry, because that was another mission of his, was to either get removed from as a level 2 and 3 offender. You're usually you are on the Rhode Island Sex Offender Registry. So whatever town or city you live in, you'll be able to go to the website and you'll be able to see the offenders in that area and where they live. And that was what bothered him. So I do know that he continued to solicit the registry to try and get his level reduced to either a 1 or completely done away with. So definitely that continued on that front. And I know that I later learned that he continued to contact the AG's office and other members of the detective or the state police, as well as I believe it was I think he sent letters to Providence Police, because that's where he was initially registered at. But after that, I no longer had communication really with him. I found out after the fact that the case was disposed of, and then I later learned his name resurfaced, as the major said, in February-ish, I would say.
Right, and Major, as you alluded to and is now well known, the belief was that he didn't actually die. What made you believe that he didn't actually die?
I'll defer to Conor on this, but before I do, anybody who reads that obituary and had any kind of knowledge of Nicholas Alahverdian knew that he wrote that 100%. And there were certain things in that obituary that just didn't make sense for a person who had passed away. And, for example, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, he said he was diagnosed with it, and then literally 2 months later, he was dead. That's uncommon. He spoke about children in the obituary. No one ever knew him to have children. Conor, you can give a little more on that as well.
Yes. So when during the initial conversations with him, he never disclosed. Not that it would really be part of the call where I'd ask, "Hey, who are you with?" or "Do you have kids?" From a guy who's got a warrant or who fled. But nothing was ever discussed about how he was starting a new life with his wife and children. That was never mentioned. And this is 2019. And then fast forward, I get notified through another members of the detective bureau that other agencies were looking at Nick and that they were looking to speak with me because they were hoping I had some information on him. And I never really dug too much into Nick's background up until this point. And that's when I started to, because something just didn't sit well with me, based on how the major said, how he really composed, carried himself, spoke. And it seemed just too good to be true. Somebody who called me and was, thrilled about, denouncing his citizenship and starting this new great life overseas. Next thing you know, he's dead from non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which, I had to do research on, and not a really common thing to have at that age. And then his timeline, all of a sudden he had a wife and children. I believe it was more than one. And as the major said, if you just read the obituary, and I could probably I can list several things that were just red flags that stood out above and beyond.
Like, for example, Brian, like he in the obituary, it never gave the exact location of his death. Also, Rhode Island Department of Health, if there was an out-of-country death of a U.S. citizen or a Rhode Island resident, they would typically get a death certificate from that country of origin within 2 weeks. That still has not happened. So things like that just didn't add up.
Right. There's never, as far as you know, there's never been a death certificate.
Not that we know of. No.
Yeah. And
No, not at all. I that was as part of my investigation subsequent to determining or hearing about his death. I checked, and there has been, and that was through the Rhode Island Department of Health and through Interpol.
And then right after that, then did you start hearing that there was supposed to be a funeral?
That came over the weeks, I believe, to follow. And that was just another thing to add to the list of what made me and a lot of other people think that this is just too good to be true.
Right. And those funerals were supposed to be, my understanding is there was one funeral, and then did you reach out to the church to voice your suspicion?
Yes. So, Brian, to back up, what ended up happening is I didn't just this was all brought to my attention by the Department of Public Safety out in Utah. So they contacted us, as I said earlier, about looking to speak with me regarding Nick, and I learned that he was the subject of several open cold case rapes. There were CODIS DNA hits that hadn't been entered or checked back in the day, and now they have a unit that focuses on that. And this detective or investigator out there came upon Nick's DNA and was able to identify several cold case rapes, and one of which I do know that he was able to get an indictment on. So he was just as convinced as I was. One of a very, 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 very smart and intelligent investigator. He did some homework on him and then came to me with it. And I shared the same views as him. And we started digging. And then we started following social media that he was, the Alahverdian family Facebook page, Twitter accounts, and we started following stuff. And it just seemed too surreal. And we all thought the same thing, that he faked it. And that's when we started seeing the Facebook post about the first funeral. And coordinating with Utah, they were like, hey, maybe we should reach out. Because now the FBI was also involved, because I'd learned of the warrant for fraud that they had. And we were like, maybe we should see who's, behind this. And that's when I reached out to, I believe it was St. Bartholomew in Providence, the church. So yes, I did end up reaching out just to gain information, and then ultimately I shared what I had, and they didn't feel comfortable with hosting the funeral any longer.
Yeah, and then so he tried to, or someone tried to plan a funeral at another location.
Did so. This it was the wife, the widow, allegedly. So to understand how it all came to be, like the major said, the obituary did not disclose who his wife was. And then that's when we determined this woman named Louise, who was supposedly his widow, was trying to facilitate funerals from across overseas, and had, a list of requests. I wouldn't say demands, I'd say requests that be done at the funeral on Nick's behalf. And it was just very bizarre because Nick had no ties to that community really, other than maybe possibly having some Armenian blood in his heritage line. But it was just very bizarre. Nick was not part of that community. He didn't know who this priest was, and this widow from overseas is trying to set up this funeral.
Right. And is it fair to say you believed this whole time he was the one pulling the strings?
Without a doubt. Just the way that it was even discovering the social media accounts, history was erased. Nick's history was erased prior to really his death, and any history that was discussed or pointed out on those accounts was picked by somebody that could only be Nick. I mean, date, time, location, people present, witnesses for DCYF legislation, lobbying, State House, all these events, and it was just like too picture perfect. And people commenting on posts on obituaries. And then there were responses from the Alahverdian family that were like, to the extent, again, to the date and time, Nick was very proud to stand beside you on this day. And for this legislation, it's like somebody who just died in 2020, but fled to Ireland and less than 2.5 years ago is able to absorb this much information and retain it. It was just bizarre. So to me, I knew right then and there that it was too specific. It right. Just didn't sit right.
And at that point, I'm guessing Utah was looking for him, but again, as far as you could tell, he was gone. There was really no trace of where he was. Major Kramer, I don't know if you want to speak to this. What does that say to either his ability or the fact that now he's been gone for quite some time and nobody really knows where he is?
I think he definitely had some element of being tech savvy. Just a small piece of evidence is all the emails that are coming to us was from protonmail.com. That's in our industry is a commonly used email platform for fraudulent activity. So that was another little piece of the puzzle. At one point, we had received an email, I believe, from the Alahverdian familyoffice.com URL, accusing us of like overloading his social media. Well, someone has to have that technology or savvy to go in and be able to look at how many times someone from the Rhode Island State Police IP address is actually trying to access whatever social media he has out there, and he was annoyed by that, or someone was annoyed by that. So yeah, I think he definitely had some element of being able to manipulate or being tech savvy to go into the computer, being educated to learn how to either track things or even like make yourself disappear, like be gone basically. At some point I'm sure he was using some kind of onion router or a Tor router or something, because anytime we try to look at the IP addresses, it was clear that those were being masked somehow. I think any of the phone numbers he was probably using to call here or call whoever he was trying to call, or the family officers trying to call Luis. Those are typically not, numbers you can't track. They'd be like voice over IP numbers, something that, law enforcement would have a hard time finding. So he definitely had an element of avoidance and how to disappear.
And then when you fast forward now to early 2022, and he's apprehended in Scotland, or the authorities there claim this is the same person, Nicholas Alahverdian, Nicholas Rossi, using the name Arthur Knight. What did you think, Detective O'Donnell, when you saw the news out of Scotland and I guess some of the first pictures of this person?
I knew all along it was a gut feeling that he was still alive, and I wasn't surprised. I was I was hoping we found him a little bit sooner, but I guess everything happens for a reason, and it took some time, but they found him, and I see the same person that Arthur Knight is to be Nicholas Alahverdian. It took some time to see some of those photos and images of him. He still did up until his recent interviews I've come across. Did a pretty good job trying to cover up who he was, but there's no doubt. I mean, the lay person could see that they share some pretty good similarities. He did put on some weight, and wears hats all the time, some pretty big ones. But other than that, it's 100% in my opinion him.
What does it say to you that this person over there is now doing a bunch of interviews denying that he is Nicholas Alahverdian?
It really just supports my belief and my accusations that it's him. Only somebody as arrogant, egotistical, narcissistical as Nicholas Alahverdian Rossi would do that. He's trying to convince every single person that watches that interview that this whole thing is made up and that this poor person is not Nicholas Alahverdian and that it's just a travesty and that he just can't believe it. And I genuinely feel for his spouse or whoever she is to him, because she's mesmerized by what this person is feeding her, and so I hope the damage can be undone. And God knows how many victims there may be over there, whether they be financially or any other type of crime. Because for somebody to uproot their whole entire life, go overseas, live a life over there during COVID and all these crazy things in our time, and to have really not much, money's got to be coming from somewhere.
Well, and I think this has been mentioned before that to a lot of people, right, this is comical. It's like you have somebody who appears to be pretending to be somebody else, dressing up, wearing an oxygen mask, in a wheelchair, again claiming he's not somebody he is. Major Kramer, this is someone who has a significant history and is wanted on rape charges, and even in Rhode Island, from what we now know, there's a history of assault allegations.
So make no mistake, while the public sees this as comical and a good story, Nicholas Alahverdian is a dangerous individual. If you look at his past history from police reports, you see there's an MO, there's a mode of operation. And it's very similar in a lot of the police reports you read, not only in Rhode Island, but in other states. He has a history of meeting a woman somehow, whether it be online or somewhere. They end up at someone's apartment, whether it be his or somebody else's, and he prevents that person from leaving, and then an event happens after that. That's a dangerous individual. So the fact that we truly believe that this is Nicholas Alahverdian over in Scotland, and he is in some sort of custody, makes me feel a little better, because I truly believe that it's just a matter of time before he would do this again to somebody else.
Well, Major Robert Kramer, Detective Conor O'Donnell from the Rhode Island State Police, I want to thank you for joining me, and of course we'll see what happens next with this just crazy story.
Right. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Much.
Thank you, Conor.
Alahverdian is not wanted on any Rhode Island charges now. The man in Scotland who adamantly claims he is Arthur Knight and not Alahverdian, who is also known as Nicholas Rossi, is still in the court process there as authorities try to get him extradited to Utah to face a sexual assault charge there. I'm Brian Crandall. Thanks for joining this latest episode of NBC 10 True Crime International Mystery.